Dyer wave.
3.
Our anthropology is not derived by human psychology or, empirical data from MIT or something like this. It's derived from the revealed aspect of what we see in Christology. And so there's no real way to diagnose man's problem and to understand man and man's anthropology, as I said, without the right theology.
Can you hear me?
Yes, how are you?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We're doing good. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Yes, so Julia, this is my wife Jamie. Jamie, this is Julia.
Nice to meet you, Jamie. How are you?
And welcome everybody. If you would, be sure and click like and share. Thank you for joining us today. Hopefully sound and everything is good. Today we're going to be talking about some of the areas that you would expect: femininity, orthodoxy, and one you wouldn't expect, Bitcoin. That's right. We have one of the, I think she has a video titling herself one of the bad bitches of Bitcoin. Is that right?
Old video called The Basic Bitches
Basic
of
Bitches of
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
It's super
I'm
cringe
sorry.
now. I don't think it's even listed
That's
anymore. The better one is How to Be a Bitcoin Hater. That's like a good classic. It's still relevant.
And then
I'll be releasing some more in the next 2 weeks because we have a book coming out on the topic.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, and then you have another video that I want to ask some questions about, which is probably, I think, your biggest hit getter, which is about the 50 differences between men and women. So maybe let's start it off with, tell us what you want to about yourself and your Brave the World, your channel, and then we'll get into orthodoxy.
Yeah, sure. So I started the channel like over 5 years ago now. I had my Twitter before that, and then I decided to become more active in politics. And I started with some like pro-gun conspiracy stuff. I wrote my own original content and just put kind of monologues together. And then I progressed into being an ANCAP and talking a lot more about political philosophy. I did some stuff with InfoWars. That was fun. And I then discovered Bitcoin, and I got to talk to Alex about Bitcoin. I was one of the first people to talk to him about it on his show. So, and I don't think he's into it. I think he got some bad intel about it. So that's too bad. But, I made a small impact for a couple of years before he changed his mind. Either way, I ended up changing my mind on some of my views because they were no longer cohesive to reality. So I was an atheist for 20 years. So obviously that shaped some of my opinions in terms of politics. And I ended up deciding that I was wrong. And it's difficult to undo 20 years of wrong thing. But I did it. And so that ended up putting me in slightly a different direction on my channel. But I guess that's it. I got it. I did a lot of Bitcoin stuff. That's still the same because it's actually even being a Christian and into Bitcoin, that's actually makes more sense than not. And I'm also a mother. So I've kind of been going in the direction of self-sufficiency and homesteading and parenting and all that, because that's what is natural to my life currently.
Yeah. So what were some of the things that took you from ANCAP and atheism towards Orthodoxy? I know you have a background that you mentioned to Michael Sisko that's you're from Russia, and then you had a period where you tested out Protestantism. And I watched your video about what took you back, but maybe for my audience, if they're not familiar with you and that journey, what were the things that you saw in the Protestant world that were enough to move you in the direction of Orthodoxy?
Sure. So, do you want me to tell you why I became Christian in the first place?
And then Orthodox.
Yeah. So the first thing that changed in my life was I became anti-abortion after being pro-abortion for 20 years. And when you change an opinion that is quite drastic, that makes you question your other held beliefs. So if I was wrong about that, what else could I be wrong about? And I think that was kind of more on a subconscious level. And so it's interesting because I became anti-abortion before I became Christian, but that almost led me to my path of Christianity. And so I realized that you can't have objective morality without an objective moral giver, which is God.
Exactly.
And this realization happened because I was in this sphere of people who claimed to be moral, like the non-aggression principle. They touted all of these libertarian ANCAP morality, but it's like self-created morality. It wasn't ever grounded in anything substantial because they would change their morality based on the circumstance. And one day, having sex with a 13-year-old is okay. And the next minute you were mean to me, so you aggressed against me. And the next day, spanking your kid is totally evil and wrong, but psychologically manipulating and abusing someone because you think you're making them do something correct, that's okay. So it was just so all over the place. And that kind of just witnessing that in the community made me realize, whoa, you can't take your morality from some dude on YouTube or some philosopher you like. You can't do that. It has to be completely objective, and only God can do that. So that was the number one thing. And then the problem of existing, anything existing, that's kind of a big problem that atheists don't address very well.
What made you change your mind about abortion? Was it becoming a mother?
No, I changed my mind about abortion 1.5 years before I got pregnant. So no, it was actually some Catholics that changed my mind, but they didn't change my mind because they weren't saying it from a religious perspective really, but they were just very intelligent. They were, some of them I met in my theology class in university, and some of them I met years and years later at a Mises meetup. So it was an economics meetup, and they were very intelligent, and they just challenged me on some things that I thought everyone kind of accepted. I'm from Canada. It's a very secular society, so no one really challenged me on these opinions before. And they were like, no, life starts at conception. And then I couldn't say otherwise. And then that just got me thinking about it a lot more, and I had to overturn a lot of my preconceived, easily given notions about the issue.
I think a lot of times people find the problems with the ethics the easiest means to come out of the atheist realm. I mean, there can be other arguments, there can be other persuasive things, but the ethical issue is just the most accessible and the most obvious. I think we have a lot of people who we've seen convert because they couldn't really find any way to ground all of these ethical claims. And most people are more familiar with ethics than an argument from epistemology or metaphysics. So, yeah, I think that's a one to always hammer home and to point out that, most of life is under, in some way, the domain of ethics. And in order to have ethics, you've got to have some kind of benchmark, some kind of standard. And that requires things like objective truth. And if you don't have a system, a philosophy that allows for or can give a ground or justification for that, then your system is built on sand that's going to fall apart. Mm-hmm. So I think you mentioned in your video, you talked about how a lot of the Protestant groups and churches, while they may have good, sincere motives and be doing a lot of good things, ultimately, in terms of the ideology, the theology, we're seeing the slow sort of collapse of the Protestant world. I know that Episcopalians, mainline Lutherans, their churches are actually projected to die out because they've adopted sterility. They've adopted all these preposterous doctrines that will actually lead to the end of their church. So what were the things that you saw that were problematic in Protestantism?
Yeah, so I went straight for the Anabaptists when I became a Christian. So I think I'm a bit of an extreme person. So I went for the most extreme Protestants. Yeah. And, after a certain, first of all, I didn't like the churches ever. I just went and I tried to do it, and it just never clicked for me. I never liked it, but I just forced it. Okay. What really got me out of it was actually reading the arguments. And I read The Kingdom of God is Within You by Tolstoy, and he inspired a lot of kind of Anabaptist thinking. Not I know it predates him, but the way that they, a lot of the arguments he took to another level. He's a Christian anarchist, and he inspired Gandhi to do his peaceful revolution and all that. So he's a huge prominent figure in that strain of thought. But they're hardcore pacifists. The argument literally at the extreme: if your wife and kids are being murdered in front of you, you cannot fight evil with force.
I call him Tolstoy. How's that?
I couldn't side with Tolstoy in that, or the Anabaptists. And I don't think the Bible teaches that.
No, of course not.
End of conversation. It just doesn't teach that.
No, that's retarded. And by the way, the church fathers don't teach that. And a lot of people will try to say that the early church taught that. No, you can find Irenaeus, you can find Athanasius, St. Ambrose. They all talk about the legitimacy of the death penalty. And by extension, obviously, self-defense.
Yeah. So to me, I was not sold once I really dug into the core of their beliefs. So I remember looking forward to reading this book. I got it in Russian and in English. And I just I read it and I couldn't believe it. I just I need a different strain of Christianity. This doesn't make sense. So that was one of the big things. And then I kept going back to Orthodox Church for the main holidays and once in a while, and for me, I was telling myself, oh, it's because I come from this, and I'm just it's what I feel is more normal, when it was actually the opposite. I was rejecting it almost because I dislike what Russia is and what Russia has become and how the churches in Russia operate and are. My mom has severe PTSD going into Orthodox churches from her childhood. So there's a lot of issues. We can go into that later. But so I had to really, it was hard for me to go to Orthodox church. And I went to one in San Francisco, and it was hardcore, Russia vibes, old Russia vibes. And the priest was psychotic and very, very overwhelming for me. And then I went to a convert church. So it's still ROCOR. I went to a ROCOR church with a convert priest. He was a monk, but he was a convert. He was an American guy. He learned Slavonic. And I've never, ever experienced that before. I'm from Russia. I go to church. It's all Slavonic. It's all Russian people. And I went to this church, and there was like full of wonderful people, and I didn't get any of these vibes. And I realized that the baggage I was carrying wasn't Orthodox baggage. It was like Russian, like horrible village people Russian baggage. And then I was free to go back to Orthodoxy. And luckily, it's the correct Christianity. So yeah, good. Worked out.
I was just going to ask if you had relatives that were Orthodox.
Yeah, everyone, all of my family.
Yeah.
So all of my family on my mother's side are Orthodox. My father's side are all complete atheists.
Was it the bad experiences that you had like in Russia that led to the atheism, or what was the
I can tell you the moment I became an atheist, I was 6 or 7, and I lost a thing I was playing with at my grandma's house. My grandma was devout Orthodox. She would bring me to church, and actually remember enjoying it. It was a little scary and spooky, but I enjoyed it to an extent. And she would read prayers over me at night, and I knew them off by heart, and I liked all that. But then I lost like a thing I was playing with, and I remember kneeling down in the sun. There was a ray of sunshine on me, and I said, God, please let me find this toy. Like I'm just a kid. Like, why are you punishing me? Like, this is not fair. And I didn't find the toy. I'm like, God doesn't exist. And it's the most infantile reason. But I was a kid. Like, it's a childish reason, but I was a child. And I just never went back. And I became like a fedora edgy atheist for 20 years.
I think a lot of people have that attitude even as adults. When they pray for something, it doesn't happen. They just decide that God doesn't exist.
But it's such a high time preference attitude. Like,
sucks for y'all, because whatever I've asked for, I got. So like,
right. Well, that's, now that I'm an adult and I look back and all the things that have happened to me and all the things that could have really gone wrong and maybe should have, I'm incredibly thankful to God. I think someone had to be looking over me.
Yeah, no, I was kidding. I mean, yeah, I think a lot of us have those phases where we go. I was never atheist, but I had a kind of a generic Neoplatonic phase where I wasn't sure what the deal was, and I was tired of churches and American church corruption. And then you realize that church corruption is everywhere. It's not something you're going to get away with, and to a lot of and a large part of it is if you're patient, you'll eventually come across, like you said, the church that's right for you within the world of Orthodoxy I'm speaking of here. So. For me, I agree. It turned out to be a road core that was the good fit for me. But so let's talk about femininity, because this is a big thing that and everybody, by the way, you can go watch her last video on her channel that's linked, where she talks about her journey into Orthodoxy. You did a video a while back that got a lot of views, 400,000 or 500,000 views, about the differences between men and women. Have your views, and it was very sciencey. It was such a sciencey piece. It was so grounded in papers and research, which is fine. I'm just playing around, but this is under attack. The idea that men and women are the same, and this is all part of this sort of a satanic global elite inversion where they want to really destroy the relationships between men and women, and because that's where humans come from, right? We don't come from labs, even though they want to grow us in labs. We're not at that point yet, so. As a female, what's going on here? What are the elite trying to do? Why are they trying to destroy femininity?
Well, again, I mean, it's the typical reasons. They try to pin everyone against each other, and the more conflict there is, and the more loneliness and depression there is, and the more broken the family is, the better they have it. And I mean, look at the Black community. I listened to this guy, and he does like a call-in show, and he's Black and he's a Christian, and he talks to women specifically about this very issue. And I bring up the Black community because they're like the extreme victims of this. Like, they went in the 50s, they went from like a 90% within wedlock children, and like almost no divorce rate. And then in one generation, it was completely inverted. They were targeted, and their family unit was targeted and successfully destroyed. And he battles this, and he talks about the state of women specifically. And we see this in every community and culture now. They were almost like the test net, and they succeeded, and they're doing it to everybody now. And it's horrific. And women buy into it because they're confused, and they're taught from a very early age to only think about themselves, and then they're special. And it's just a side effect of this like culture of narcissism. And because the state gets to grow from giving women more benefits and more handouts, and empowering them in a way that disempowers men and placates men, the government grows. And we see that with like the voting patterns and the types of policies women want. It's actually a horrendous and horrific thing they've achieved, because a woman acting the way women are acting today is perfectly okay within the home when she's under the guidance of her husband. And instead, she's doing this and extrapolating this behavior to like the whole country. And she's listening to like the big daddy government. And that's where things get really, really dark. You cannot have a society of Oedipal mothers that are like eating the children of society. That is what's going on.
That's amazing. That's amazing. You're talking about Jesse Lee Peterson, right? It has to be here somewhere. So yeah, and I like his videos. And by the way, LBJ at the time, back when they came up with this whole Great Society scam, he talked about how this would get everybody in that community on the dole for the next century, right? He talked about how that whole plot would basically disenfranchise and destroy that whole community. And then, by the way, I do believe in the analysis of the CIA in the 80s and the crack cocaine epidemic. I think that was an engineered thing as well. And you can see a mirror with that in the South in terms of, or the Midwest, with both fentanyl or meth. I think those are partly psychological warfare, drug warfare operations. Again, this is in the model of the British Empire and the Opium Wars. It's no different. People don't understand that there are social engineers that will study these things to wreck entire communities, entire people groups. And now what we're going through with this attempted Great Reset is a kind of coordinated attack on the whole West, basically. I mean, it's not just the West, but the West leads the way in terms of, economy and all that. So the Great Reset is a big step towards this kind of technocratic socialism. It's going to be a problem. And a big part of that is to destroy women. And, that's why I think your videos are on point. Jamie has been doing some really good stuff on femininity, women as well. Anything else, girls? Converse here. What are they doing to women? You wrote a book where you talked about princess programming.
Oh, yeah. Well, I wish I had watched your 50 points video. I didn't know about it until a couple minutes ago.
It's a bunch of science. But it's not for girls. It's science.
Oh, right. Can you think of some of the highlights of that to talk about? Do you remember any that stuck out to you?
It was literally like scientific studies about what boys do when they play with trucks and how they draw art and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite things is our eyes are literally different. So we see movement and color slightly differently.
I didn't know that, by the way. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's one of the first 5. Yeah. And that's why, like, the way it manifests in little kids is boys tend to draw with 2 to 3 colors, like dark colors usually, and they tend to draw motion. Girls tend to draw people, places, and things, and they use like a way wider range of color. Obviously, there's like nuance and exception to this, like everything else, but our eyes are different. We're different. We evolve differently. And when I say evolve, I mean adaptive evolution, not, yeah. Anyways, I think I'm in company that understands what I mean when I say that.
Did you notice anything about how the differences were complementary to each other?
Oh, yeah. So like, okay, like the typical one is the baby crying. A man could literally sleep by an infant, a screaming infant, and sleep through the night because like you need to get up to kill the buffalo. And the woman has a small seizure when her baby cries. Like her brain has a small seizure. when she hears her child crying. And this is like, this is just common sense, but then the reason I did the science stuff is because everyone will dismiss you as, oh, that's just, that's just a story from your marriage or something, like from 90% of marriages, but okay. But now they do have the scientific research to back it up. So you get both the, the lived experience, and you get the data, which is very easy to measure because you can hook up your brainwaves and have a baby cry and see what happens. It's very straightforward. And, people still dismiss it. I find, like, when I bring this stuff up to women, they'll be like, my boyfriend is such a much lighter sleeper than I. So, like, that's not true. I'm like, okay. Good argument.
I figured out why women are more chatty than men. I don't know if there's any scientific evidence about this. You might know an article or something, but because you have to teach the baby language and you have to keep talking to it even though it doesn't talk back to you. So it's like a one-sided conversation a lot when you're alone with a baby. You have to just keep talking.
Well, I think that's very sweet. But I don't know, because so the thing I talked about in the video was because men tune out repetitive sounds. So, and like the woman talks a lot more than the men. So it's like, which came first? Is it because men tune out repetitive sounds that we have to repeat ourselves even more for them to hear us?
Yeah.
So it's this funny thing. But that's an interesting point with the baby. But to future mothers, also don't stress about that, because they've done studies on parents who are deaf mute and they have kids who aren't deaf mute, and that means the mom's not talking to them at all, and they're fine. They develop language skills; they're just fine too. But that's probably a contributing thing, chatting to a person that can't talk back to you.
Yeah. He always tells me to talk more. I don't talk enough.
In certain instances, yeah. But Jamie's more on the quiet side. She's definitely a more quiet, passive person, which works good for our dynamic. But I thought that part was funny.
Does femininity come naturally to you then?
Yeah.
I thought that was funny when you were talking about the tuning out part, because I think that's every relationship deals with that, like where the guy has to like hear it 3 or 4 times before he finally pays attention. And she gets mad because I tune out sometimes when you're
I just will stop talking. If no one's listening, then I'll just be quiet. So
yeah, men are all about.
But she was talking about how there's a dynamic to why it is that way. It's not that all dudes are just trying to be jerks. It's that we have an ear and a brain that's conditioned a certain way for these types of situations for adaptation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same reason why more men are on the autism spectrum in that specific way.
Yo, that's why I'm over here spurging out all the time on this channel. And I can make these jokes because this is a legit spurg channel. Nobody can make fun of me. And
well, the femininity thing is interesting because it was actually kind of like within a marriage, like taking a more submissive role came really hard for me. That's something I work on every day, actually. And becoming a Christian helped a lot. Definitely helped a lot. And it brought a lot of peace to my marriage and to my state of mind. And I think a lot of women never get past that. Like they have this like urge to dominate. And then when they do dominate, they like hate their husband because they don't want him to be passive. And no real woman wants a submissive husband. Like I understand wanting to be equals and blah, blah, blah. Like that's more reasonable, but no woman actually wants a submissive husband.
No.
She doesn't treat them with respect if he submits to her. It's crazy.
Well, that's why every beta male gets left.
Or just used.
Yeah, right. For that beta bucks, baby. What about a couple more things before we move on to economics? So what are you finding in Orthodoxy? Have you looked at the Orthodox world in terms of the issues going on there geopolitically? I know that you know a lot about Russian geopolitics. Now, typically on my channel and in my circles, we take a generally positive Russian attitude in terms of the church because of the fact that we know the U.S. State Department is involved in the Ukraine situation. And while we don't see anybody as angels necessarily in these geopolitical issues, I'm just curious if you had any comment on what you see going on with the State Department using Bartholomew to try to split the Orthodox Church in Ukraine. And I see this actually as a pattern where they wanted to split the church in Montenegro. They want to split, ultimately, I think, the church in the U.S. as well, down the middle. Do you have any thoughts on that? Has that come up at all?
Not really. It's, I've had some conversations with some church friends about it, but I don't think there's much disagreement there, and everyone kind of sees this kind of stuff as a sad affair.
Right.
The thing that really bothers me, and I understand where people are coming from, but like a lot of people on the right, whether they're Orthodox or not, they like admire Russia and the Russian politics and the church and how they're more conservative and family oriented and blah blah blah. And I think it's like the symptom of America going towards like this progressive horror that right. Anything that's slightly less we want to like venerate. But Russia, like you can't judge Russia just by its Putin riding a bear optics. Like the optics are great, like the masculinity, orthodoxy, family, but it's kind of it's a LARP. Russia's not a haven of believing Orthodox pro-family people. Like the population has very similar problems that the populations in the West have, and to the more extreme in many directions. So you just have to look at the statistical evidence for that. 1 out of 3 abortion. So we still have a declining population, first of all. So I don't see where this family first stuff is coming from. Maybe I know Putin's trying to do some policy changes for that, but that doesn't mean they're working. And the fact that he's trying to do it means that there is like a rot in the country to begin with. So 1,600,000 live births a year versus 600,000 abortions. That's 1 in 3 women getting abortions. That doesn't sound like an Orthodox country to me. And that's like 2018. That's a 2018 statistic. So I don't know what people are talking about. We have some figures say 60% divorce rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, my priest is a pretty based Russian, and he left the Soviet Union as well a long time ago, and he's aware. He talks about all those same stats, and he's pretty realistic about whether because sometimes people want to leave the U.S. and go to Russia, and he's like, well,
oh my God,
you're going to have a lot of the same problems when you get to Russia. So
you couldn't. I'm being 100% honest with you. You couldn't pay me $500 million to go live in Russia. Maybe for a year. I'll take it for a year, but permanently, I wouldn't take.
Well, one thing you mentioned in the video, or maybe it was the interview with Michael, you said something like, if you wanted to run a business, it's very difficult because it's very sort of mafia-like, right?
Yeah, you can't just shake off 71 years of horrific, oppressive, totalitarian communism, where they killed all the smart people and the ones that they didn't kill got away. So there's no one left in Russia that can even run a business honestly to begin with, because they're either dead or they left. And if you try, you'll end up like drinking yourself to death or like not doing anything, because they'll take your business from you. It happens all the time. They started doing it to my dad. So they just, you get an accountant and then you wake up and your business is not yours anymore. And there's no courts there that function. It's all bribes. You're going to bribe someone when your business is gone.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to ask before we get off the topic of church, femininity and the Orthodox Church is a big it was a part of my conversion. I felt like the whole experience was so much more romantic than a Protestant church, and they gave such a higher place to women, and obviously Mary, they do not venerate her. How did you find that, the femininity and the orthodoxy going together?
I always say Orthodox churches have the most beautiful women. So something's working. I think Orthodoxy, because of how rooted it is in the truth of being a human, it just naturally accepts our differences and empowers us to be okay with those differences. Whereas Protestantism is on most of the time steeped in modernism, and it is more modern Christianity. So how could it not be? So it's difficult for them to maintain that when the culture that it comes from and that shapes them is so progressive.
Yeah, I think the Orthodox Church restores so much more dignity to women, even more than feminism ever could,
Cheers to that.
Yeah.
All right. Now let's get into this crazy economic stuff, because I feel like with this last run, a lot of people are interested in Bitcoin. They're talking about it. It reminds me a lot of the 2017 period. That's when I first got interested in crypto and Bitcoin. And I've always been kind of hesitant, even though I was buying in back then. And you have been for a long time kind of a Bitcoin champion. So maybe start us out with somebody who's long-term with this stuff. Like, what is the best way to explain Bitcoin to a new audience, and why do you think it matters, given where we are in terms of the dangers of money printing, fiat, all that stuff?
Sure. So one thing to understand is Bitcoin isn't just a currency. It's a whole entire new system of money and finance and economy. So basically, before we had single entry bookkeeping, where you would go to a store and buy something, and they would write down what you bought, or you go to get some money and they write down how much money you got in their one little book. And then you got double entry bookkeeping, which is like a bank, where you have a third and a third party verifying your transactions and amounts and stuff. And then Bitcoin is triple entry bookkeeping. So you don't have a third party. You have a ledger of absolute truth that cannot be changed, that is verified and secure by an algorithm and by work. So that's good. You know why that's good? Because that is a lot more censorship and confiscation resistant than a bank, let's say. And the other amazing technological advancement about Bitcoin in terms of finance and money is it is capped at 21 million, which means it is deflationary as opposed to inflationary, like a fiat currency that is not backed by anything, because you just print that, or you can dilute the currency, you can debase the currency. You cannot do that with Bitcoin.
Right.
It's math, it won't let you. So why is that important? Because inflation is theft, and theft is wrong. Therefore, Bitcoin is the most moral money. So if you are looking to get involved in Bitcoin, get involved for the correct reason, and that is it empowers people to be financially independent, to not rely on third parties, to keep their wealth, and to not have their wealth debased over time by a government that just feels like it.
Yeah, I think the first thing people don't understand, which if you watch my Quigley talks, everybody out there go through my lectures on tragedy and hope, because one of the things that Quigley covers early on is the scam of gold notes and fractional reserve banking, and how the whole modern world is built on this scam. So if you don't understand that, Bitcoin is not going to make any sense, nor will any of the other, right? So you have to know that.
If you're interested in that and you don't want to read a huge book, or you're not ready for that, or you don't want to read a Creature from Jekyll Island that explains the Fed really well, we just wrote a book that is cool. It's small enough for you to get a really good intro but not be overwhelmed with information. It goes over exactly what you said, how our current monetary system works, the history of money, what debasement is, what inflation is, why it's bad, and it does it all from a biblical perspective. So That's great. And then it talks about Bitcoin and why it fixes all this stuff. So if you want to get into Bitcoin and understand economies, it's called Thank God for Bitcoin, available on Amazon. So
okay, is your book out now or almost out?
It's out now. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
My Bitcoin Bible group and I wrote it, and it's the perfect thing for this conversation.
Oh, good. Yeah. So I wasn't even aware about that. So yeah, you can go to her channel, go to her website, Brave the World, and you can find that book. Now, next good point about Bitcoin that I've been thinking about is usury, because a lot of Christians have an ethical issue with the principle of usury. Of course, the church fathers, typically in the first millennium, condemned usury. And the more you think about it, Bitcoin itself is kind of anti-usury. It can't be inflated. That's a good point here. And if we think about the modern monetary system, it's built around usury. The whole global economy is a giant usury-based Ponzi scheme. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be problems. There's no silver bullets. There was one thing that really gets on my nerves anytime this topic comes up is people say, well, how come your thing isn't the perfect solution to everything? What about this problem? What about that? Well, there's always going to be problems, right? So there's no silver bullet that solves all problems. But if we start thinking in terms of what is ethical money, yes, the gold standard is ethical. It makes sense to tie it to, something objective. However, we went off the gold standard in the early 70s, and that allows
we're never going back.
Yeah.
The masks are here to stay, and gold will never be tied to your fiat ever again. Get over it.
Right. So on a usury, now it's true, people who own Bitcoin engage in usury, but you can't stop that. But the system itself isn't usurious because of its limitations, because of the limited number.
Exactly. So if you are under a system that is literally predicated on theft, you are going to be more inclined to live an immoral life when it comes to your finances.
Wow. Yeah, that's good.
You're more likely to live a high-paced, high time preference life, which why would you, just on a subconscious level, and we see this with millennials, why would you save your money and bother with that when it's going to be worth half the amount by the time you're 50?
Yeah, that's what the Michael Saylor.
Just drink and have fun.
That big investor guy who just put 400 million into Bitcoin, it was saying that one of the motivations for that was that the money printing of the stimulus in the last year, 2020, basically devalued the dollar by some crazy amount, like 10%. So if you want to,
I was just on a live stream with him, and I knew that happened, but I didn't know that it was him.
Oh, cool.
and we were talking about holding Bitcoin, and he said something, and I'm like, you're not really holding Bitcoin unless you live in your mom's basement.
Yeah.
And my husband was like, that guy's like a multi-billionaire. I'm allowed to joke with whoever I like.
Now this is funny. So here's what the next thing is. So those are the couple of basic principles. A couple more things. Obviously, this is where it gets tricky because the blockchain technology is what allows for the proof of work, like you're talking about, and the sort of the objective reliability. And that's another thing that goes into economics is people want reliable transactions. They know they can't be cheated. There can't be scams. Again, nothing in the world is infallible and foolproof, but what we're doing is we're talking about a system that's much harder to cheat, much harder to scam. So the next thing is that people say, oh, but what about the fact that in the Great Reset, all the global elites want to utilize the blockchain technology. They want to tie everybody to e-money and these different central bank created digital currencies that they're going to come up with. My argument is that, well, we're not going to be able to necessarily stop that. They're going to try that. Doesn't it make sense to try to have at least some of your holding in something that would be a potential competitor like Bitcoin? I mean, there's nothing that's a silver bullet. I mean, do you think the dollar is going to do better? I mean, it doesn't make any sense, right?
No, I completely agree. Sure, they can try to do a bunch of stuff. They're always going to try to do stuff. That doesn't mean you just opt out and do nothing.
Right.
And so far, Bitcoin has benefited people, not them. And they're actually threatened by it. There's talk of trying to criminalize private wallets, which is the whole point of Bitcoin. They want everything to be on an exchange that they can monitor, and they're proposing to have to do know your customer for like $250 instead of $10,000. It's totally insane. And that doesn't just affect Bitcoin, that affects everything you do. So, I mean, COVID is already putting everything on card, like cash is already being kind of taken out of circulation to some degree, and they're trying to get us used to that. So if they're moving everything online, you want to have more secure and more empowering and more private options. And Bitcoin isn't 100% private, but as long as they don't trace the address to your identity, then it is. Yeah, so there are ways to, you don't have to use mainstream exchanges that tie you to your bank account. You can exchange Bitcoin in person. You can use cleanly mined Bitcoin. You can mix your coins, which actually is still a pretty difficult tracing process for them, for mixed coins. There's many other ways. You can use more private coins like Monero if you're doing actual things you're really, really worried about. Sure. So you can't just opt out. You gotta like keep with it and be one step ahead. And Bitcoin is like 10 steps ahead.
Right. I think that a lot of people just don't understand the logic of it. And by the way, I've watched and studied Bitcoin for 10 years. I waited a long time because I was skeptical. A lot of the fear, uncertainty, doubt that I watched, that I still see people in the chat right now spitting out. Dude, I've been seeing this fear and nonsense for 10 damn years. And if I had listened to you guys, I would have never gotten into Bitcoin, but I finally went in 2016, 2017. It was a wise decision, one of the best financial decisions that I've ever made. And so, and I still see people repeating this 10-year-old FUD bullshit.
Yeah.
And I mean, you guys are the ones missing out. Now, is anything foolproof? Do you think that the dollar is going to be foolproof in 10 years? I mean, that's the illogic of these people right now. And also people
that's the actual speculative
exactly investment. And people, it's all based on speculation, and people
3.3 trillion in debt.
Yes. Don't you understand? You can't just be in debt for eternity. Like at a certain point it pops, right? That's the real bubble here. And by the way, I never told anybody don't get gold or assets. I never said that. So people have always had these either ors. Oh, if he's saying get Bitcoin, then he's saying don't get gold. I didn't say that. I said have all of the assets that you can. Right. And I'm just saying that as the hedge that has the most potential in the Great Reset and all this stuff would either be gold or Bitcoin. But Bitcoin has performed way better than gold. I mean, have you watched the last year? Right. Duh. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the gold thing is a touchy subject for a lot of people. First of all, theoretically, gold can be inflated. The best way to do this is if there's a asteroid in space and they prove that it has all these metals, and the speculation, it can just be speculation. It doesn't even have to be impossible to physically mine those metals. They can inflate the market completely. So that's just how markets work, and they can do that if they want. So yeah, I mean, it's unlikely, but it is possible.
Right.
So also gold is manipulated to an extent. Also, holding a lot of gold is it's a huge barrier to entry. To do that, like a lot of people have to trust third parties again to hold gold for them. And we see time and time again when there's a big mining billionaire in Canada. He had a bunch of gold and he decided to take it out, basically do a bank run on his gold. And they couldn't deliver on the gold because they were acting like a freaking bank, like a fractional reserve bank with his gold. So it's got the same problems right now.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I just, Max Kaiser the other day just shared an article about, I think JP Morgan had to pay, $930 something million for manipulating gold. So, yeah. Now people say, oh, but whales can manipulate Bitcoin. Yeah, but the degree to which the manipulation and the dangers that are present, I think, in Bitcoin are actually less than in the other fields because of the limitations on the number of Bitcoin, because of the objectivity and rationality of what the blockchain is. I mean, it's just a better. So again, there's none of these that have no risk. Everything, the dollar has risk. The dollar is a huge risk.
The incentives like whales, yeah, of course, because it's still not that many users of Bitcoin. So of course, whales are going to have a big impact. That's going to reduce in impact over time with more adoption. But whales have an incentive for Bitcoin to, keep climbing, unlike governments who tend to not care if they enrich their population or not. So the incentives for whales are aligned to keep Bitcoin secure and climbing higher, not to bankrupt people.
I think we're past the fear phase too, right? The skepticism and
it's been
fear
a long
phase,
time.
that a lot of people had even 4 years ago. Like when I started when it was around 2,300, right under 3,000, and it was really hard to get. Really, Coinbase was a nightmare to get on. It was difficult. I was scared.
Don't use Coinbase.
I know, but I'm saying back then, right?
Yeah.
So I was scared, and then now it's like, no, there's a lot less fear. You've got these big institutional investments going into it. So I think that we're past the like, this is a thing that the terrorists use, this kind of nonsense.
What's a whale?
A person who has a huge amount of Bitcoin that can influence the market.
Oh.
Yeah, so sometimes they'll do dumps of Bitcoin into,
like the Bogdanovs.
Yeah.
Don't beat. If you see that video. So those are great entry points. Let me ask you this, because this is the one, and I'm just being honest, like the one danger thing about Bitcoin that I have worried about is the fact that it seems to have a subversive nation state power. Now, ultimately, the way the economy is, I recognize that we're already in a post-nation state situation. So there's no easy solutions to how to get out of that. I'm looking at it more in a realistic way that I think you mentioned in your video. Christians, especially Orthodox, we want to be in a position where we are participating ethically in the monetary system. We don't want to forego economic power. It's not inherently evil. Right. We need to be capable and educated in economics. And so that's why I'm saying that I think it would be wise. I can't tell anybody what to do. I'm not a financial advisor, but I think it would be wise to have these kinds of assets for where we're going in the future, just as a hedge and as the duty that we have to do ethical money, to do ethical transactions. What do you think?
Yeah, I know it's difficult to trust in something that is so foreign to you, and no one's asking you to do that. But yeah, get educated, understand what this monetary system does to people and how it functions and why, and then look at alternatives and try to not use PayPal as much and not use banks as much and not participate in the things that are objectively immoral.
The the dangers are outweighed by the positive. That's my argument.
Yeah, definitely. And also COVID print machine, that's going to impact our economy totally. It has a delayed effect, but the dollar will go down in price eventually. The Canadian dollar, I predict the next year, by this time, is going to be on the decline. I think Canada's going to go through a financial crisis. They printed the most money out of any country during this crisis. No. So I'm not going to be caught dead holding Canadian dollars. I am not going to hold money that's going to depreciate. And that is my financial advice. If you're Canadian, don't hold Canadian dollars. You don't have to buy Bitcoin. You can buy land, you can buy gold, you can keep your money in US dollars, because that will crash later, I think. Mm-hmm. But again, don't keep fiat. Buy real assets if you have enough money to do that with.
Yeah, Jamie and I were riding around a while back, and we were talking about, money that we had in savings. And I was thinking about the fact that, it's just sitting there, and the dollar is deflated every year. So it has less purchasing power. So it's worth less and less. And I was like, this was a while back. I was like, why don't we just put all of the savings into gold, right? And so the logic of that was like, now wait a minute, now gold is just sitting here. I mean, it's went up a little bit from, the last 6 months, last year. And then I was like, well, why would I just have it sitting in gold when the returns on Bitcoin are much better? I mean, and people say, well, but what if it goes down? Well, that's why you move it to a stable coin, right? So you can get out if you have to. It's not like you're necessarily going to lose everything. So yes, there is risk, but again, there's certain loss in the dollar.
I was just gonna say, can you be certain that the dollar is gonna inflate?
Yes.
Over time.
Yeah. I mean, do you think they're going to stop printing money? No, never.
Yeah. Every currency has a lifespan unless it's tied to a real thing. So that's just a historical truth, and I don't see why it would change now. they might want that to not happen, but like this is where they overstep. Like when the dollar halves in price and they can't keep paying people welfare to like sit in their pod, they're gonna have riots that are a lot more significant than what we've seen recently. So like I think they're overplaying their hand a little bit. And yeah, going back to Bitcoin, you don't lose unless you sell it. Like unless you sell it for fiat or something, you don't actually lose if it goes down. So have like set yourself some goals. Like, okay, I have this much money I can speculate on or invest or sit on, however you want to sell it to yourself. And then I'm not going to, touch this unless there's an emergency or until it grows to this much. But again, like I would suggest looking at Bitcoin as the moral alternative to fiat, because that way you're not like, oh my God, is it up? Is it down? Did I make a good investment? Did I make a bad investment? Don't look at it as an investment. I've always looked at Bitcoin as the future option, like the future thing that I want to participate in, and the thing that's going to outlive fiat currencies. That's how I look at it. If I need to spend it, then I spend it. If I don't need to spend it, I don't spend it.
Yeah.
End of story.
And all these people in the chat fussing and complaining. Look, if you knew so much, then you would have bought Bitcoin and sold it, right? It's a big scam and it's gonna drop. It's gonna okay. Well, then why didn't you buy it? How come you're not millionaires right now?
Yeah, because no one that's into Bitcoin is like upset. No one's upset right now, trust me. And the ones that do it for the right reasons aren't going to be upset if it drops down to 5K again. They're just not.
Yeah.
I know people who bought at like 10 cents and then bought a house when it went to 100. Mm-hmm. And they're done with Bitcoin. But that's if they looked at Bitcoin as an alternative to currency, they would have like kept some, because that's just, you want some money, right? Like you want to save some money. So it's all a matter of your attitude and perspective going in. It's up to you how you feel about it.
Yeah,
right?
And again, so as Christians, you do have an ethical duty to use your money ethically. We have a long tradition of not to participate in unethical things. And if you understand the present monetary system, then you understand how it is very unethical. It's all based on debt. It's all based on theft and slavery. And I've never changed that analysis. I mean, ever since I read Tragedy Note, I got into Ron Paul stuff back, when Ron Paul was popular. And I knew about libertarian stuff prior to that. So I don't think people understand that Christianity is not separate from economics or the civil sphere. This is a total lie that I don't know where people. It's out of Protestantism.
It's mentioned. Money is mentioned over 2,000 times in the Bible.
Absolutely.
And money is used in Jesus's like metaphors and parables more than any other comparative literary object. Yeah. So I don't think Jesus was like money bad. Money was just an everyday reality of life that is relevant to life and that shapes the way we act act between each other. So we need to take it seriously and accept that like you can't just like deny that it's a thing. It shouldn't be awkward.
Yeah. And by the way, I never said that Bitcoin is the only option ever. I mean, there are a lot of other possibilities, potentials. It's just had the best performance so far, and it has the most likelihood.
I'll say it. Bitcoin is the best option. It's the most secure. It's the best. Right. It's had the best minds work on it. It has proved not to have like a king, unlike Ethereum. Mm-hmm. Not that a king is bad, but Vitalik is a little flawed and doesn't have a moral compass, in my opinion. So if you want to hold Ether and like you're okay with that, that's fine. But just know what you're getting into. Like he can change things about the protocol if he wants to. So that's the risk you're taking there. It has some positives, but as a use case for a monetary system, like I wouldn't be behind Ethereum in that sense. I think it's a good test net and has some other interesting applications, but not the same applications Bitcoin has.
Right.
Well, I just remembered there's plenty of literature about how currency and money is alchemy and has a lot of occultic principles behind it. The dollar bill has a lot of symbolism.
George Soros has a book, The Alchemy of Money. So.
Right. Joseph Farrell has one. Templars invented the banking system, so this is all wrapped up in the type of occultism that we talk about.
Because they worship money, they worship mammon. They chose their god.
Absolutely. Before we go to the super chat questions, and I would add, everybody, if you want to support us, be sure and follow Brave the World over at her channel. Her link is in the description. What is your prediction? Will you do a forecasting for us? Do you see the 36, 50K, 100K Bitcoin by 2021, 22?
No, I don't think so. I think it'll dip back down before the new year, maybe like 15K, and I think it'll like straddle like 15 to like between 15 and 20. And then who knows? Like, it's such a difficult market to predict, but I do not think it's going below 10K ever again. I think it's unlikely that it'll go below 15K. It could happen, but it's unlikely. And I think there's some potential big players coming in. I think people are watching, and more people are buying in and using it. And the technology on top of Bitcoin is getting more, it's getting completed and more interesting and more private. And shout out to all the core devs for like working for free. You're awesome. Thank you for your hard work. And yeah, that's my prediction. And I really hope to see governments feel that it's too late to try and do anything about it.
Yeah, it's going to be, if one government tried to take action to shut it down, we've already seen this phase like 3 or 4 years ago where governments were trying to make it illegal, and it doesn't work. I think we're past that point. Unless
it doesn't work, yeah. It'll make it difficult for exchanges to like you won't be able to like tie an American bank account to an exchange, and like it's going to be harder to buy it and trade it and all that stuff, especially if they pass like the 250 rule. That's insane. If they pass that, then that's like a financial freedom reduction overall for everyone, not just Bitcoin. It's total insanity. I hope they don't do that. But yeah, it's not going to like kill Bitcoin because there's other countries, and also you can not listen. It's not like where you break the law within your bank account and they just like shut you down or arrest you. Like it's a much more complex system, and the laws around it are actually very nuanced and difficult for them to kind of navigate. So a flat out ban in any sense is difficult to even pass. Right. Like with this kind of tech, they don't even understand what they're doing.
And if one country tries to ban Bitcoin, the other countries that don't ban it will just do better. So it would be stupid. It would be a dumb move, I would say.
Yeah, there's that factor to it for sure.
All right, so Jordan for $10 says, this is kind of out of nowhere, but does the presence or parousia of Christ apply only to the Son, or does the Spirit also have a presence? Well, in terms of the redemptive roles, the presence of the Spirit at the eschaton is not bodily or visible. That's why Christ took on human nature. So it's primarily Christ who is going to be interacting with us. The role of the Spirit, that the Eastern Fathers say, is to direct us to Christ, and the role of Christ is to direct us to the Father. So there's that triadic movement. And every theophany is, of course, triadic, but it's really the visibility there in terms of the parousia applies to the person of the Son. Dency Diaz sends $20. Thank you, Dency. Much appreciated. You didn't say anything, but I'll take your $20. Father Deacon John sends $3.89. Hello, Julia. I saw your interview with James Corbett that you did. So he likes your Corbett interview.
Oh, that's old school. Thank you.
That is old. This is James Corbett of the CorbettReport.com. I like you, Corbett. We've done interviews too. I'm not knocking you. I'm just being silly here. Sid B, $20. This is I love this stream. Thank you. Also, Jay and Jamie, you are a cute couple. God bless you guys. Thank you, Sid B. Oh, that was sweet. Next time, however, I want to talk to Sid A and not Sid B. But thank you for that $20. Not a verse, $15. I'm just following OK's command to super chat. Yes, and that's why everyone else in the chat, all 345 of you, must also follow OK's command and super chat. Janie Sophia, $25. What is the best way to buy Bitcoin? This is an interesting guest, and it's always a pleasure to see Jamie. Do you have a particular exchange that you or app that you recommend?
Depends what you want to do. If you want to be more private about it, you can do localbitcoins.com. You can go to an ATM. There's like every city will have some Bitcoin place that has an ATM. The best way is to buy it in person from someone you trust, someone you like, an acquaintance, a friend. But if you don't care about the privacy aspect that much and you want to get in and have some Bitcoin and just do it, you can sign up to an exchange. I prefer Kraken. Gemini is a good American option, and Kraken has never had a breach. And I know some good people at that exchange, and I trust that they won't steal your money on purpose, and I trust that they're competent enough not to let someone else steal your money. Having said that, when you buy Bitcoin, and if it's any significant amount, do not keep it on an exchange that is literally just keeping it like at a bank. What's the point? Get a hard wallet, get something like a Trezor, and have your own private keys. Basically, private keys, that is what your own bank is. It's a matter of just writing down a bunch of words and like burying them in your backyard and remembering a PIN if you want easy access to it at home. And that way, no one can get your Bitcoin unless they specifically know you bought it and they come over to your house with a wrench.
Can you make the face, General Now says, for $5 that Jones made when you told him you're a monarch of 1776? I didn't make a face, and I didn't mention that, so we'll leave that one. We'll leave that question aside. But thank you for that $5, General Now. All right, everybody, this was a great discussion. I'm going to add her book, by the way, to the show description that she just sent me. So if you're watching this in the next few days, be sure and check out her book. And subscribe to me. You can get my books and Jamie's books at our website, Esoteric Hollywood 1 and 2. Signed copies right for Christmas time. Wake your friends and relatives up. Get Miss Julia's book about Bitcoin. That will be some hype Christmas conversations about them Bitcoins. Right?
And give it to your priests.
Eggnog and Bitcoin. There you go. Yes, we want to have empowered Orthodox people in the future. So thank you. Great conversation, Julia. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much. This was fun.
Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye. Bye.